Hello from Brooklyn, everyone. We are going to go over the slides for hands-on 3. I'm just doing challenge 1 in this video, and I'll have a separate video for challenge 2, and let's get into it. So going back to our miles per gallon scenario, what we're looking at here is we want to provide a simple web application where someone can pull up on their phone, enter how many miles they drove, how many gallons they use, and get a number back to determine whether their car needs to. Maybe they need to think about getting one that's a little more eco-friendly. Okay, so this is a flowchart we discussed in class, and what you'll notice is I have the 3 of the 4 big flowchart symbols, the chiclets or ovals for the start and the end. Got parallelograms for input and output, and then a rectangle for processing because you're doing something to data. There's one thing that's missing that we'll use a lot more, which is a diamond, which we'll use for decisions, but that'll be later in the course. We'll be doing a lot more if-then decisions as well as loops. And the first question is hey, is this flowchart proper? So let's go through the pseudocode first, kind of based off of this flowchart. We start the program, we get float miles, we get float gallons. And what you see here in this particular case is that we have one input box in the flowchart, but we really in our pseudocode need 2 input lines because you can only get one input at a time in JavaScript as we're writing it. So technically this is incorrect, but because a flowchart is a higher level of abstraction than pseudocode, that's not a big deal. Okay, we're going to calculate float miles per gallon. Yep, we got a rectangle for that. We do an output and then we end it. Now the thing that's missing from both the pseudocode and the flowchart is the declaration statement. So up here there should be a rectangle that says declare float miles, float gallons, and float MPG. And how did we know which variables to declare? Well, we wrote our pseudocode, figured out what variables we needed, and went from there. Now one thing that's not shown in here, because this pseudocode is language agnostic, is are these numbers really numbers or not? In other words, we're assuming we're getting numbers instead of someone typing in the word variant of a number. Well, that's something we're going to have to deal with in JavaScript separately. Okay, so what you're going to end up doing is going to this web page that's shown on the screen, and we're going to use that to download the source code. But first, what part's the file name? That's number 4, mpg.1.html. The protocol is HTTP. The path is number 3 here, mpg, which is basically the folder underneath public HTML on your web server. And the domain name is sal.cisuTulsa.net. I'm going to go to this web page, make sure it works, but I'll show you that live shortly. Okay, so we'll walk through this again, but how do you find the source code in a web page? You right-click, view page source, and then again, we'll do this here shortly. We are going to use the prompt method. What the prompt method does, it's a JavaScript method that allows you to have a box pop up on the screen with some kind of message asking for an input, and then a rectangle underneath it that allows a user to enter input and put either some value in there, hit OK, or cancel. Now, we're talking down here, how do you make sure if you're expecting a number that you're really getting a number? We're going to take JavaScript input. If you remember, all JavaScript input initially is a text. We want to make it a number because we want to do math. So we're going to do something called parse int or parse float, and that force types that input, forces the input to be a number if it's possible. Now, in JavaScript, there are a couple of things you need to understand about how variables are defined. When you first hit that var, you type var in a variable name like var float miles, that is an undefined variable. It means that there's been nothing assigned to the content of that variable. However, it's telling the program that there will be something there. So it's undefined, there's nothing there. There's another similar but different thing called null. Null is an assignment value, which means you actually get null assigned to the variable. In this particular case, let's say we had float miles equals null. Well, there's no equals undefined. It's either defined or not. Null is a very specific thing that kind of comes about because we either say it's equal to null, which is nothing. So null is equal to nothing, which is different than not defined. And null comes into our vocabulary in web apps a lot when someone asks for an input and then they hit cancel. Null will get assigned into whatever that input is. And we'll go through this in a later class, but what value does this provide? In this particular example, if let's say you're doing a prompt box, please enter your age, and someone hit cancel, then you could test if age is equal to null, and this is the equivalent of equals equals equals, then you get an alert box saying you clicked cancel. Don't worry, we're going to do a lot more of this type of thing later in the class. So what you're going to see is in the JavaScript file on the web page, we're going to have the script embedded, the JavaScript embedded in the HTML file, and we're not using the proper naming conventions that we're supposed to use in CIS 2013. So we have to take this script out, make it a separate file, and all of this here goes away, and we replace it with script src for source equals, in quotation marks, whatever name of the JavaScript file, and quotation marks. Actually, that's a typo. There should only be one there. But that's okay. This is just a PowerPoint. Okay. So homework challenge number 1, we're going to go to that MPG application, download the source code, we're going to copy it, we're going to paste it into our Komodo edit, we're going to make a new JavaScript file, we're going to fix the naming conventions, we're also going to fix one other thing with the force typing, and then we're going to post it to our web page. So here we go. So this was the web page, like that. This is the web page that we need to go to. I'm going to go ahead and hit refresh, and you'll notice and it says here enter miles driven. I'm going to type something like 123 and enter miles gallon used 12. Hit OK. Miles per gallon equals 10.25, which off the top of my head sounds perfect. So we hit OK. How do I view the source code? Right click and source. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see this code better. And now what we have is we need to get this script right here. First and foremost, we need to get rid of that script and put in another JavaScript file. But you can't clearly, you can copy it here, but you can't edit it here in the browser. We need to go to our file. So first thing we're going to do is copy all, select all, and then copy it. And I'm going to go to my Komodo edit. Sorry about that. So we're going to create a new file from template. First one is going to be HTML5. So you get your standard template, go ahead and replace it with what you copied. Go ahead and hit save. Now I'm going to save mine to the desktop and just create whatever name that you want to that you will then later call up from your web browser. In this particular case, I think I'm calling it HW3 for Homework 3 Challenge 1, but that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I'll go HW3 for Homework 3 mpg.html. That'll be a little more descriptive when I'm using a web page. Then I'm going to create a new file from template. And I just did that with a Command T or a Control T if you're on a PC. Clearly I'm on a Mac at this point. So I created a JavaScript, a blank JavaScript file, and I'm cutting the JavaScript from between the source tags into the JavaScript file. Now, if you notice when I copied it from the web page, it was indented a couple of tabs. I don't like that. I want to make sure that everything starts at the far left tab, and it'll make a lot more sense as we do more complicated programs that you have the indentation right. It's just a whole lot easier for you to visually see what groups of code belong to each other. So once I get done doing that, going to what we did in our pseudocode, the very first thing is, well, let's save the file. Go ahead and save the file, and we'll save it as whatever name that we are going to call it in the HTML. In this case, HW3 mpg.js. Now, again, first thing first, we're going to declare the variables. We have the variables from our pseudocode, which are not properly named in this file. So we're going float miles, float gallons, and float mpg. Now, once I have those 3 variables declared, I can get rid of all of the vars in my text. And that's one of the benefits of declaring it up front, is that we can not have to worry about typing the vars. And when we talk later about local and global variables, declaring your global variables up front will make your life a lot easier. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 2 lines of text associated with getting the miles from the user, and I'm going to combine that into one statement. So instead of having miles equals prompt and then converting that to parse float, I'm going to do it all in one line. And that's okay. I know I said you can only do one action in a line, but really what I'm doing is I'm pulling the information in through the prompt, and then I'm parsing that through the parse float. So I do the float miles, prompt enter miles driven, I parse flowchart to force type it to a number, and then I do the same thing for gallons. So I'm going to prompt the user to enter number of gallons, and then force type that with parse float to make sure that it's a float type number. And the reason we're doing this and not hoping that JavaScript just does it right with the text is because sometimes it works with JavaScript and sometimes it doesn't. And we don't want to go into a program hoping that JavaScript interprets what we want. Now, next thing we're going to do is replace our calculation for miles per gallon, and I want to force type my calculation even though it wasn't done that way in the original program, because I want to make sure that it's really a float, and instead of miles divided by gallons, it's float miles divided by float gallons. So go ahead and get rid of the miles per gallon line, that one right there, because we don't need it anymore. And then just last thing, make sure we update our alert statement to call the value of our calculation, which is float mpg. Now once we're done with this, we're done with the JavaScript. And you go look up here on the top of the browser and there's no apparent errors. So we go back to our HTML and I just modify the H1 a little bit just because I wanted to. You don't have to. But where we took the JavaScript out, we want to add the source file for that JavaScript file we just made. So you type src and then it has to be in quotes, the name of your file. So we're doing HW3 mpg.javascript, end quotes. Go ahead and save it. And then we can actually go preview it. And in this particular case, I'm going to preview it in Firefox, which I recommend because we're going to use Firebug later. And just go ahead and put some values in here for different calculations. So just did the 1, 2, 3 divided by 12, and then you can just put in a couple of extra numbers, make sure it works. Now, what we will do in more complicated programs is not just wing the numbers, we'll actually have test cases available for them. So we know our code works, but it only works on our computer. We have to bring that up to our website. So I'm using Fetch on a Mac. Once you've already done Fetch once, you'll be able to save your settings. It automatically in mine opens up the public HTML. I'm going to drop it in whatever folder I'm using. In this case, I'm using test on my particular web server. I'm going to go back to my desktop and I Finder, and this is easier in WinSCP because it's right next to it. But I pull up my Finder and I put it right next to my fetch, and now I can drag and drop files. So I select my HTML and JavaScript, pull it over, and then as soon as it shows up in fetch, it is live on the website. Anyone can view it. So I'm going to go ahead, go back to Firefox. I'm going to go launch my URL. Now notice I go CIS.net. My path is test, that's the folder, and then the name of the HTML file. Now, once you do that, you can go ahead and type in numbers and test it and make sure it still works. The bottom line is it works the way it worked on your computer, except now it works on the web. So that's what challenge 1 is all about. You should be able to do all of those things kind of easily because we're really not writing new code at this point. Anyway, if you have any questions, please let me know. You know how to get a hold of me. It's in the syllabus. Aloha.